I'm ready. I feel a little whimsical today. The chapter of this presentation and or book that's going to come from this presentation is Divorce Looming? So why is this man putting a chapter about divorce in a book about marriage? Most of the people who are going to be reading this, I would imagine, are listening to my YouTube presentations in which this content is being unfurled. Most of the people who are paying attention are probably younger people who are getting serious about getting married and want to understand marriage better, God bless them, before they enter into the quote, holy sacrament, close quote, of marriage. And or there are people who are in marriages now, and maybe there's some trouble going on in the marriage, and they're thinking about what do they need to know, or how can they pay attention to what the trouble is and rectify it in some way. But I wanted to include a chapter on divorce for a very good reason. 53% of the people who are going to get married this year are going to get divorced. We have to think about being married itself as something that is a superhighway that leads frequently to divorce. So I believe in any book about marriage, there ought to be some discussion of the phenomenon and the experiences that people will have to go through if the marriage begins to die and they have to get serious about getting a divorce. It belongs right alongside of the content about how to find, preserve, and cherish a marriage. It isn't always possible to do that. We are living again in some kinds of mythology. We believe that marriage ought to last for a lifetime. And that's probably a very lovely value, one that started when life expectancies were about 40 years of age. But it is really quite an unusual thing for two people to couple fairly young in life and to expect that relationship to remain vital over all the rest of the years of their marriage. I even take that 53% figure with a grain of salt. Yes, 53% of all marriages made this year will wind up in divorce. What isn't in this tally is a large number of people whose marriages have actually died, but they're still living together, and they may never go through the rituals of divorce. They may live together in a hostile or a cold or a detached or an unpleasant communion, like having a roommate you can't stand, but they will never get divorced. So the number of people who move through marriage and wind up without a sustaining marriage anymore is probably up between somewhere between 60 and 70%. If you throw in the people who've outgrown their marriages but are still living in them and don't have the wherewithal, the courage, or the resources to actually get a legal divorce. For these reasons, I felt I needed to say some things about divorce. I just had to bear witness 2 weeks ago, as a matter of fact, to somebody who's silently miserable in a divorce that is painful. Uh, she had been married, became a widow when she was about 45. I saw her during her widowhood for two reasons, neither of which had much to do with her human relationships. One reason was she had a very stressful public service job for Los Angeles County, and I had to constantly listen to what the machinations were in her workplace, how she could survive, what else she might do with her life. So occupational stress was a very important topic on our work. In addition, the poor woman had two children by her previous marriage, the one with a husband who died, and one of the children, the younger one, the daughter, did splendidly. She was bright, capable. She went to UCLA. She went on to USC Law School, got a law degree, and started a very successful career as a lawyer. And she married a very nice man and provided two grandchildren to my client, all of which were topics of great satisfaction and great fulfillment for her. Unfortunately, she had a second child, the older of the two, and he's carrying a very heavy psychiatric diagnosis. I hate diagnosing, so I'm not even going to mention what it was, but he has been unable to be independent in his life all the years of his adult life. She's had to provide housing for him. She's had to give him spending money. He remains a failure to launch himself person, and he's frightened of the world. He gets jobs intermittently, but they're unpleasant. He doesn't like them, and he quits again. So she's constantly still parenting him year after year after year. And I stopped seeing her about 20, no, about 15 years ago. I stopped seeing her because wonder of wonders, a man had come into her life and she started dating him, and it seemed to be going well. He was very kind to her handicapped child and very receptive with him. He had three children from his marriage, and they were very accepting of her as a new woman in their father's life. He had been previously divorced. He was not widowed. And she announced to me that they were engaged. She was feeling good about living. Everything seemed to be working well. And she said goodbye to me. Well, now she's back. They did get married. It's 15 years later. And the marriage is enormously painful for her. Uh, she also is hurting. We went over her status. She has some money in reserves. She owns the condominium that she has her male son living in. He pays her a little bit of rent. He has another part-time job that's generating some income, but she doesn't have much in savings. She doesn't have much put away for her older years, and she's now moving towards her 70s, and she's very frightened that if she got a divorce from her present husband, he's very wealthy. She would lose her lifestyle. She would have to go move in with her son in the condo, and she doesn't know if there would be enough dollars to keep her independence going for the rest of the years of her life. And she feels trapped. She doesn't want to burden her daughter with the problem. So we did a survey of what were the issues with the present husband that were unpleasant. First of all, he made certain commitments to her, economic commitments, that if she married him, he would always make sure she had enough funds that she could take care of herself if anything happened to him. But he hasn't done that. She's wanted him to put her name on the title of the property that he owns, so at least she would be a half owner of that property. He absolutely refuses to do it. He's recently reworked his will and his family trust terms, and he's leaving everything to his girls, and he's not leaving anything to her. And she's very hurt and very upset. And she's been arguing with him about this, and she can't budge him. He said, "You don't have to worry. I'm not going to die soon. I'm taking care of her. You have a nice life. Don't ask me to divest myself of some of my wealth now and provide for you. I'm not interested in doing that, and I'm not going to do that." So she feels very, very trapped. And they're in separate bedrooms now. We're about to go visit what happens when marriages begin to die. They have all the symptoms of them, and she's in the middle of that unpleasant flow in her life with him. They barely do anything together anymore. He goes off and takes separate vacations. He owns a sailboat. He'll go sailing to Catalina without her. They have very separate existences. They don't share much in common. And the best I could do was commiserate with her because she's trapped. I have no idea what a path forward would be. She's thinking about it and I'm thinking about it. We will meet again but I have no miracles in my back pocket right now. She may indeed wind up living the rest of the years of life with him and feeling miserable being in that place that he lives in with him. All right, I will take my notes in hand again. I said there are a large number of people who have dead relationships and probably should get a divorce. What makes people hesitate about getting a divorce? And some people hesitate even when it's hurting them and don't get a divorce. Well, we are very heavily socialized about this issue. We are taught from childhood that marriages are kind of sacred. They are a promise made. They are to be honored in sickness and in health, for goodness and for poorness, for riches and for no riches. And we're supposed to bear and live in the married state, no matter what the vicissitudes of life are going forward. And the culture treats the coming apart of a marriage with a desperate quest. Somebody must have done something wrong. Who is the bad person? Somebody is a bad person if the marriage comes apart. And the each of the two people caught in a dying marriage are trying to position themselves. They don't want to come across as the bad person. So they keep hoping the other person will do something egregious, because then they can point to that and say, I had no choice, but I had to get divorced. And a game goes on. The game is who's going to be the bad person that's going to be castigated by the world and treated poorly and stigmatized, and who is the poor, forlorn person who's going to be abandoned and was the good person who wanted to keep the marriage going. And if both of them want to be in the good person role, it's very hard for the marriage to come apart. Somebody has to be willing to be a bastard, a cunt, a horrible human being, and bear the opprobrium going forward. Otherwise, the marriage is going to get stuck. I hate the model that marriages come apart because someone has failed and or someone is evil. That is not the case at all. Uh, what happens? Why do marriages begin to peter out? Uh, First of all, none of us are stable entities. We come together at a point in time, and hopefully we find our partners delightful. There are values that are shared in common. There are life aspirations that are shared in common. There's a mutually created picture of how the life is going to be dealt with and in what directions it's going to be steered. And they are compatible and they enjoy the textures of each other. Unfortunately, slowly, every day of our lives, we start changing a little bit more from what we were at the moment we decided to marry somebody. Some of us are very fortunate. The changes in person A are quite commensurate with the changes that are going on in person B. The journeys are not in opposition to each other or at cross purposes with each other. They can be the growing differences in what they used to be can be compensated for or can be incorporated into new understandings of what new purposes are. And they're resilient and not moving on paths that are incompatible and can continue to reinvent the nature of the marriage over and over again. To expect that that's going to happen, though, is foolish. It may not happen. People may wind up stuck. Somebody may decide they need to become a Catholic priest and they shouldn't be heterosexual anymore and married to anybody. Who knows what it is that somebody is going to want to become that will make them incompatible to the other person. I said that I was eager to have children, but I thought about it. I'm never going to have children. If you want to have children, you better find another partner and leave me alone. On and on and on. So, as I said, marriage is not a union between stable entities, and the fit between the two parties can deteriorate. A second reason that marriages fail is that they were never constructed properly to begin with. My approaching elderly client who's now trapped in a relationship that feels very poisonous to her with a man that feels autocratic, ungiving, unconcerned, unresponsive to her, was not put together properly to begin with. They never had a workable financial understanding between each other about where the finances would come from, how they would be allocated, and what would be put aside, for instance, to take care of their old ages. They never even discussed it with each other, and they certainly didn't have a comprehensive plan in place. Uh, the third thing that leads to maybe marriages becoming under greater stress is if children had been had for the longest time, the parents will be decent to their children, will stick together through thick and thin, and will hang out because the children are still growing up. But a time of crisis comes when the children get more independent and more capable of being on their own. And now the two parents have to rework their relationship with each other, recommit to the new relationship that's starting as the children depart home. And the fault lines in the marriage that were hidden because they were being distracted by the need to pay a lot of attention to their child or children now begins to be exposed, and the marriage starts to feel not so good, and restlessness starts in one or another of the partners. Do I really want to sign on for this journey now that there are not going to be any children involved in this journey? The matter of abandoning children that's in the background of this particular development also is another sacred trust. It's as important as not abandoning the marriage partner. Anybody who gets a divorce knows that unless they're into a horrible custody battle and are married to a monster, their access to their own child or children is going to be markedly reduced. The children are going to start living in two different houses and are going to start bouncing back and forth between two parents. And there's probably going to be many days of the year when a parent is not going to have access to his or her children. They'll be tied up in activities out in the community or with the other parent. And no, I'll take that up later. I just want to say that the idea of even partially abandoning children is very hard for people to swallow. They will stay in a bad marriage and feel very unfulfilled, even hurt and betrayed in the bad marriage because they will not, quote, abandon their children, close quotes. For the good of the children, they will stay there in misery. Uh, so let me talk about some research outcomes. For the longest time, it was common knowledge that marriages wounded children. Divorces wounded children, I'm sorry. Marriages wound children too, unfortunately. But it was believed to be almost inevitable. If there was a divorce, the children would be scarred by the divorce. Part of the reason for arriving at that conclusion is that it was a two-set uh, experimental model. There were children who grew up in intact homes, and there were children of divorce. And various studies of the children in those two categories would be made. School adjustment, school grades, presence or absence of mental health problems, presence of good friendships, absence of drug dependency, a whole bunch of things were tested. And on every measure of what would be preferred, the children in intact homes were doing better than the children who had gone through the struggle of divorce and had to adapt to being divorced. Some bright person finally, and I used to scream about this until it started to become regular. Some bright person finally decided there shouldn't be a two-group design, there should be a four-group design. There should be kids who grew up in intact marriages where the parents had a reasonable relationship with each other, liked each other, and seemed to be able to cooperate and enjoy family life with the children. That was one group. A second group where people were intact families that were cold. The parents were in trouble with each other. They were either fighting a lot or they were silent. There was not much sign of affection. So it was like growing up in an armed camp, but the marriage never came apart and they never went through divorce. The third group was people, children who grew up and were subjected to what I would call a good divorce. The parents decided to separate. The children were handled reasonably well. They were not made to feel guilty. No bad should be. The parents maintained a partly aloof but partly respectful relationship with each other. There wasn't a lot of ongoing turbulence between two people who had separated. And there was that group of children who had been in what I consider a good divorce. And finally, there were the children who had been in horrible divorces, endless custody battles, a lot of one parent bad mouthing the other, fighting for the child's allegiance. You don't know how terrible it was living with your mother or your father. You don't know what he did to me. I need you to be here. She's raising you wrong. He's raising you wrong. Endless warfare, and the terribleness and stridency of the marriage relationship was carried on year after year in the divorce state, even though the people were supposedly getting divorces. It could be accompanied even by frequent visits back into the court, here having the court hear disputes that were going on between the two parents about the children and having to referee the disputes that were ongoing. Now, if you ask about the adjustment capabilities and achievements of the children, by far, I will honor what's traditional. The happy kids in happy families with good parenting did the best. Their academic achievement was better. Their number of sick days were less. They had more friends. They had more interest. Everything they did, they tended not to get interested in chemicals. By every criteria, they didn't join gangs. By every criteria, they were doing better in the world than any of the other groups. In second place, interestingly enough, were the children in good divorces. They did almost as well as the kids who had never gone through divorces. They were pretty well adjusted and achieving very well, very effectively. In third place were the children in the cold and unpleasant families whose parents had stayed together for the sake of the children. And in fourth place were the parents who were in terrible divorces and still trying to raise their children. So it's not a simple question. There's no reason that divorce needs to permanently wound or cripple children. The best research suggests that for a period of time, they stagger. Their grades may go down for a semester, coincident with the separation. They may get a lot more colds or stomach aches or some kind of psychosomatic response. If the parents are managing the divorce well, that's very short lived and they blossom again on the other side of some temporary turbulence and are not permanently wounded in any way. So saying I can't get a divorce because I'm going to harm my children forever is a bunch of nonsense we're telling ourselves and a bunch of propaganda we've been raised on that has no basis in empirical validity. So, are you worried that you may have to get a divorce? I jotted down some of what I think or remember are the signs that you may be coming into growing difficulty. In marriages that seem to be failing, there's a simple index. There's growing silence between the two partners. They seem to have less and less that they feel interested in or enthusiastic about talking to their partner about. There's just a drop in the sheer number of conversations that they hold with each other. You can actually go into a restaurant on an evening and look at middle-aged couples around, and some of them are having very animated talk with each other as they're having dinner. Others are staring over each other's shoulders into the restaurant, just looking vacantly and eating their food mechanically. I would make a bet a lot of them are experiencing what I'm talking about. They have less and less to talk to each other about. They're less and less interested in the stream of consciousness of their partner. Related to this is there's a slowly building stockpile of secrets, more and more things that are being thought. Things like, I don't know, my partner is bothering me more and more. I don't feel eager to come home anymore. I'm driving slower and slower as I approach home, and I want to turn away and go out to the movies or something. So thoughts like that, bad thoughts about the presence of being in a bad marriage, critical thoughts about the partner, they're being swallowed and kept to oneself. Nothing is being worked on that might be significant, or the work throughing the through working of it might even produce an improvement in the nature of the relationship. No, hurts, criticisms, bad feelings, things that went awry, bad feelings about things that went off the rails. Those are being kept in secret. They're being brooded about, but the secret brooding is not being shared with a partner. The third sign that a marriage may be failing is there's an increasing aversion to engage in conflict. Oh my God, she hurt my feelings so bad last night. I need to tell her that wasn't good. That was terrible what went on. And instead of that, the person decides not to bring it up and just eat it and swallow it and feel the hurt of it. And as one of our colleagues who works a lot with family systems described it, the bitterness bank starts to fill up more and more and more. There's no attempt to address the bitterness, to talk about it, to try and work a way through it. The conflict and the hurt and the conversations are getting more and more strident. So there's avoidance of the pain of trying to do anything about it, and pessimistic predictions made of, if I even tried, it would go nowhere. There's a fatalistic passivity that sets in about this is hopeless, it can't be fixed, and I don't even want to talk about what's wrong because I've tried in the past to talk about what's wrong and it hasn't gotten me anywhere. The next thing that happens is the demonizing of the partner. There's an inability anymore to hold in consciousness anything that might be decent or worthwhile about the partner. It's as if preparation to leave is already starting, and it becomes more possible to leave if you can find all the character flaws and all the things that are disappointing and hateful about your partner, and just focus on those things, because that gives you some justification to your conscience and perhaps some justification to the people who are going to pick at you because you left, to deal with them. So you start marshaling your pieces on the chessboard of separation by just remembering every flaw that the person you're with has, and conveniently forgetting any decent attributes they may be carrying. The next thing that starts is you've probably once in a while had idle daydreams of infidelity to your spouse if you're married and in a marriage. We notice other people. We have momentary daydreams. Gee, maybe it would be really wonderful to be away for a weekend with that person in the mountains somewhere, but we don't do anything about it. They're kind of delightful little idle talks. If we're in a good marriage, we can even talk about those things with our partner. But as the marriage deteriorates, the idea of infidelity shows up with increasing urgency. And the temptation to engage in infidelity, if it's not already been engaged in up until this point, becomes harder and harder to push away. Uh, these are the main signs of the beginnings of the destruction of what I labeled on a previous occasion as social intimacy, sharing the stream of one's consciousness with one's partner, and having an open attitude and an accessibility of one's inner world that one makes present to the partner as the partner desires and as seems fit from moment to moment. There are now more and more walls being created, more and more secrets, more and more privacy, more and more withdrawal, and more silence going on. The fabric of social intimacy is crumbling a little at a time. I don't need to remind anybody, I think, this will come as no surprise, that parallel on the other track, sexual intimacy is decaying and going away little at a time. The frequency with which the couple actually gets in bed and starts making lust and love with each other, that frequency starts deteriorating. Eventually, it evaporates completely over a period of time. Eventually, there won't even be any more cuddling. They were, if they have an extra bedroom, one or the other of them will go off and stay in a separate bedroom. And sensuality and touching goes out of the relationship. There's no hugging anymore. There's no hand holding. There's no more goodbye kisses. There's probably no more greeting kisses. There are no more hugs to comfort the partner when the partner's upset. The touching of bodies becomes increasingly unpleasant and taboo and vanishes out of the relationship. Uh, as those things are unfolding, a new thought emerges. The thought is, depending on how far one is down those roads that I've been describing, oh my God, I may be headed for a divorce. And the thought is very frightening. Nobody, unless things are really terrible and finally terrible, embraces with any enthusiasm getting a divorce. In the beginning, it seems like a very frightening thought, and the thought is pushed away. But it does enter consciousness, and it becomes a little bit more concrete with each passing month. As I work with my own clients and my own life, because I am divorced and remarried, I would guess that the modal number of years from the time that somebody actually wakes up in the morning with, oh my God, I may be starting into a process that will lead to divorce. From then until a separation actually takes place, usually takes 5 years. There's forbearance that happens of trying to put up with things, various kinds of rudimentary attempts to change something, to back away from it, to do something else. And things are fluid for 5 years before the die is finally cast. So if any of my followers are paying attention to these signs and find themselves in familiar territory as I describe them, you might ask, what can I do about any of this? Am I absolutely doomed to get a divorce? The odds are probably good that you will get a divorce. I'm not sure you're doomed. There are some things that you need to do in order to prepare yourself for what's coming. Either prepare yourself to do a massive overhaul on the nature of your relationship with your partner, or prepare yourself for separation if it's coming. And here's some things that you need to begin to try on to get ready for the future that seems to be beckoning to you. First, stop being silent. Find your courage again and speak about the unspeakable. Speak about the fact that you've begun to daydream that the two of you may need to separate. Tell your partner the daydreams you have about what that separation would be like and what would happen. If you have some preliminary ideas about how it could be managed, discuss how you imagine that it would be managed if you were to get a separation. Uh, talk about what you would need to be. Don't do the unpleasantness aversion. Talk about what's failing from your perspective, what you would need to be different in order to consider turning aside from the moving sidewalk you seem to be on and getting off the sidewalk? Would your partner consider doing anything that would help you to be able to leave the sidewalk and go in a different direction? Not only do you need to talk to your partner, how about getting some professional help to monitor those conversations and help steer them? Go see a therapist and see if you can get some help from a good therapist, and trying to evaluate the marriage, work with it, trying to steer it in different directions, trying to pull out some of the weeds in it and plant something else. See if it's possible to reclaim what seems so badly stunted and so badly damaged at this point. Uh, Go have a legal consultation as well as a psychological consultation. Go to a divorce lawyer. I'm in a marriage that feels like it's dying. What will happen? What's the family law system like? If I filed for a divorce, what would be the steps? What would I have to live through? What would my children go through? What are the likely outcomes? What's going to happen to the monies that we have? What am I going to have to pay? What is my partner going to have to pay me? Get a take and an estimate from a good family law attorney about what life would be like in the separated state as opposed to the life you're now living unhappily in the together state. These are some of the things that you may need to do. What could you do to comfort yourself and stabilize yourself while you're trying to see if change is possible? Uh, One of the obvious things, and I'm not proud of this, but I did it for several years. One of the obvious things was I tried to stabilize a very hurting relationship by having a love affair with somebody. I had three different people over a several year period that I was having love affairs with sequentially. And all I wanted, because I had promised with a father who died on me never to leave my children, all I wanted was to have some time with a woman who wasn't my wife, who related to me differently, who related to me with a kind of sweet, loving openness, very different from how my wife related to me. And if I could get some bits of that every week, maybe I could tolerate the miserable diet I was on the other days of the week. And I went into couples therapy also with my partner to see what was resolvable, if anything, about the impasses between the two of us. So people who are highly moral otherwise can talk themselves fairly easily into taking on a love affair partner to stabilize the pain of being in a terrible marriage and to find some anodyne for that pain. uh, Finding a new hobby, taking up competitive sailing, or doing something that's very engrossing can be a distraction and help survival go on while reworking is taking place. Uh, I don't do the following. Don't capture one of the children and make the children your prime partner and start doing an excessive number of things in the company of your child. That's probably not good for your child, who at every step of the lifespan is trying in part to enjoy you, but in part to learn to be separate from you. So don't capture your child as the solution to the problem of your distressed relationship with your spouse. Now let me go on. Nothing has worked. You are on the threshold of divorce. You can't bear what's going on a moment longer. It is time to leave. How do you do that? Well, one of the things you're going to have to do is if you have children, you're going to have to talk to the children about what's happening. You can't hide that from them. Somebody is probably going to go be living in different quarters. So it would be nice if you and your spouse could come together for one last thing, to come up with a narrative to share with the children. That's a joint narrative that is a position of both of you and says things to them to help them get ready for the separation and to adjust from the separation. There, you're taking care of the adjustment has to start with the announcement that separation is coming. So here are some of the elements of what you need to say. You need to say, A, mom and dad have decided to move apart from each other. You may be engaged in, and I'm a big fan of this, you may be engaged in a trial separation. You're simply going to move apart for a while and see how that works and how life could be put together and whether you want to make it permanent or not. So if it's a trial to separation, tell them that. We're going to try living apart from each other. You know, we haven't been enjoying each other. You could see how unhappy we are frequently. And we've been fighting with each other a lot. And you deserve to be in a household that's not full of tension all the time. So we thought, well, we'll make it more peaceful. We will live in separate places and see you separately. And I know that's going to feel like a loss to you, and I'm sorry we can't tell you how long that might go on, but we'll keep you informed. The person who's moving out should say, as soon as I've rented a place, I've looked at several, I'll take you over there and show you where I am. I'm not disappearing off the face of the earth. That's where I'm going to be when I'm not at home. And you're going to come and visit me there some of the time too, because you're going to have one parent in each of two different places. And I hope you'll feel quite at home in both of those places. Both of us hope you do. Uh, is that going to lead to divorce? Well, if you know it's already leading to divorce, yes, we're going to get a divorce. The next thing is there's nothing you can do about this. Very often kids try and figure out, is there anything they can do? Can they influence the decision? We're sure that you're not happy that we're doing this and you would prefer that it didn't happen. You might even, there are Disney movies made about that. The kids get together and scheme about what pranks or stunts they're going to pull to try and get their parents to move back together again. Please don't waste your breath. You have no power to make us decide to change our minds. Only we have that power. And if we do start changing our minds, we'll tell you, but don't expect it. The third thing you need to know is none of this is about you. I'm sure on occasion you've heard us have an argument about what we should do about you. We've been unhappy, and should we punish you? Should we ask you to make amends in some way? Should we ground you? Should we take away your phone? You've heard us arguing, but the arguments we've had about you are not the causes of our unhappiness with each other. Those are not the reasons we decided we can't live together anymore. Not only can't you fix it, it's not your fault that this is happening. Please don't feel like a bad person. You're causing the family to come apart because it has nothing to do with you whatsoever. Both of us love you. We're going to be kind and involved with you, and we will continue to be part of your life as long as we're alive. We're not going anywhere. We're not disappearing, and we're not throwing you away because you hurt us and we want to get rid of you too. Now, do you have any questions you'd like to ask us? We'll be happy to answer any questions we can answer. Well, when are we going to be with you, and when are we going to be with that? Some answers will be, well, we're in discussions about that. If you have some proposals, we'll listen to you, but nothing's been fixed yet. As soon as we've come to some conclusion, we will instruct you. I want to live much more time with dad than with mom. Yes, thank you for expressing your opinion. I'm not sure that's the decision we're going to make, but we're always glad to hear from you. The grown-ups will decide. You should not be in a position ever of having to decide how much time you're going to spend with which parent. Uh, there's a judge who's going to help us decide, answer that question. And the decision will be made for what the grown-ups think may be the best for you, not necessarily something you want the most. It will be what helps your life move forward the best. Those are some of the typical questions that I can think of might come up, and some of the things that have to be said at the get-go as soon as the decision to come apart has been made. Oh, when will the coming apart happen? Well, I'm looking for an apartment. It may take me a few weeks or even a month to find a place. I'll let you know how the apartment hunting is going. If you'd like, you can come with me and look at places, because you're going to be spending some time in those places, and I'd value your opinion too, whether it's a place that feels okay to you or not. I won't necessarily do what you think is the best place for you, but I certainly will value your opinion. All right, I take care of that, takes care of that. And now you have moved apart. You are now starting to live in different places. Uh, this is something I posted on my website, and I'll read it to you because it's a topic that comes up so often. The title is Separation and Divorce, How to Sustain the Children. Our society is changing rapidly. A change that has certainly captured a great deal of public attention is the statistic that about half of all current California marriages will eventually end up with their husbands and wives seeking a divorce. If you have children and have reluctantly come to the conclusion that a separation from your spouse may be imminent, or if you are already engaged in the process, here are some recommendations about steps you might take to lower the stress for your children. Some of them, of course, may need to be tailored to unusual individual circumstances. First, to be aware of some orienting principles that may help you understand what your children may be experiencing. For most families, the principles include one, the most painful parts of being the child of separated parents are the loyalty conflicts that may be felt, particularly when there is a great deal of tension between the parents. This traps a child into wanting to give contradictory signals of loyalty to both parents, for children are rarely eager or even willing to, quote, take sides, close quotes. Two, your children may attempt to, quote, take care, close quotes, of you. That is, they may often act as if they were loyal to you and if you were the best parent, regardless of what might be heartfelt for them and experienced in secret. They will also suffer if they see you in distress. Three, sometimes the tension of being trapped in a painful divorce landscape becomes unmanageable for a child, and he or she will then simply draw as close as possible to one parent and want to have as little as possible to do with the other. Four, your children may try to figure out how to stop any tension between the two households and try to find something that might be done to make things better. Sometimes children will get sick, misbehave in school to bring their separated parents closer together out of the parents' shared concern for the child or children. Next, children may be guilt-ridden and frightened that they have caused the separation and that they are the source of post-separation turbulence. They often need reassurance that such is not the case. Times of transition, moving back and forth between mom's and dad's residences, are often stressful and can produce some conflict-laden behavior in children. Next, in cases where there is a great deal of post-divorce turbulence and an inability to form reliable and respectful working alliances between separated or divorced parents, co-parenting is not always a useful goal. Sometimes separated and separate parenting is much more achievable and much more stabilizing for the children. In this pattern, parents talk to each other and consult with each other as little as possible. Given these almost universal childhood reactions, then, the following suggestions may be useful for thinking about how to calm, soothe, and make more productive the lives of your offspring. It's best if children are not asked to deliver messages back and forth between the two households. Share the messages with each other as grown-ups. Don't ask your children to carry them. Although it may be tempting to do so, don't give in to discussing any pending court actions or the merits or demerits of them with your children. It is important not to discuss or even to let children overhear arguments over financial matters, e.g., support payments, reimbursements owed, or other disputes about money. Next, for matters of residence and visitation, and until they are well into adolescence, let children express their feelings and even their wishes, but make it clear that their opinions are not decisions. It's comforting to a children to be told that the parents are working it out and will be the ones to decide where and when the children will spend time with each parent. Next, avoid discussing the reasons for any bad feelings that might exist between the adults and resist what feels like a natural inclination to explain yourself and your position to the children and to seek their understanding and their loyalty. Next, steer clear of asking your children about the behavior of the other parent. Do not interrogate them about what goes on in the house. Refrain from educating your children about why you don't approve of the conduct of the other parent. Next, it's best for separated parents not to ask a child or children to keep an experience in confidence. That is, asking what the child has seen, heard, or witnessed in your house not be revealed to the other parent. It can also be particularly upsetting to give secrets to a child or children with requests that the secrets not be shared with the other parent. Next, don't give in to your own frustration at trying times and use physical punishment. Take your own time out if you need to gain control of yourself. Next, when a child describes what is taking place in the home of the other parent, keep silent about your criticisms of the child's behavior in his or her other home and avoid expressing your dislike of the life, the activities of the child, or life parent patterns and parenting actions of the other parent. Be quiet. Next, resist engaging in discussions of your children's own loneliness or of missing each other caused by the times when the children are with the other parent. Next, when the child is visiting the other parent, the parent who is now alone should make no more than 1 10-minute phone call per day to the child who is temporarily in the other home and should never drop by to visit. It's best if the time of such a call is specified in advance. Don't give in to your desires to make the call longer than 10 minutes in duration. Don't send text messages. Permit your children to call the other parent anytime when they're with you. Unless it is an emergency, however, the parent receiving a phone call about a problem should encourage the child to work out the problem with the parent who is physically present. It's best to avoid attempting to engage directly with the child who is calling, but instead to try to say, I think I've heard what you have to say and I understand you. I think you should get off the phone and go talk to dad, mom about this. And I'm going to be seeing you again on such and such a day. Of course, we'll talk more about what you're telling me when I see you. I think it can wait until then, though. Do not try to be a fixer of something that's going on in the other house. If a child complains about something that has happened in the other house, he or she should be told that there's nothing that the present parent can do about that. Instead, the child might be helped to find the courage to take the matter up with the grown-ups in the house where the event has happened. Next, if a parent is scheduled to be out of town or otherwise unavailable at a time that the parent is ordinarily scheduled to have the child or children in residence, it facilitates family post-separation adaptation best if the other parent is given the right of first refusal, i.e., if the other parent is asked if he or she would like to keep the children during that interval where he or she would ordinarily not be with the child. But oh, I forgot to leave out. In no way, however, is either person to be a required babysitter for the other. If the offer is made and refused, the parent is going out of town has to find a sitter and not get mad that the parent that they want to leave the child with is not cooperating. Next, children should be listened to whenever they want to speak about anything troubling them, but no adult should pump the children about what may or may not be going on in the other home. Finally, children need to find their own adjustment style and to have it respected. Some children want lots of opportunities to express their feelings about separation, divorce, and loss, and to receive kind attention for those feelings. Others want to go about their business, acting as much as possible as if nothing distressing is happening, and avoiding discussion of the disruption taking place in the life of the family. There is no correct way for children to get themselves through the time of transformation. Let each child do it in his or her own unique style. It's now 5 o'clock. I think I will stop. And I need to make a note to myself. It's the final part of the divorce chapter. It is about coping with the family law system.
Good times.
Okay, the floor is open.
Arthur, I have a lot of kind of encouragement and hope for your client in terms of her predicament. If she wanted to continue to pursue a divorce situation, and I'm thinking about mediation. I'm thinking about collaborative law. I'm thinking about many very highly skilled divorce lawyers or family law specialists who could certainly work with someone who is coming from a 15-year-old marriage with a wealthy husband.
Yeah.
So I'm not discouraged in the least in terms of what the outcome might be for your client.
Oh, you're not sure that she's going to be trapped in what feels like a prison cell on short rations for the rest of her life.
No way. Yeah, no, I'm extremely encouraged by that situation. The other question I had for you, and I've worked a lot with children, adolescents, and from divorced families, and providing support and psychotherapy. You had mentioned separate parenting.
Yes.
And the concept of separate parenting. Can you elaborate a little bit on that one?
Oh, thank you. This is from my perspective. I do not like the California state law. The California state law says the presumption is that the parents will have co-equal custody, and custody means they will continue to have the right to make decisions jointly with each other about the effects of the child, and they have to come to agreement about those decisions. They have to collaborate with each other in raising the child, and then that visitation, residence of visitation will be decided about 50-50. That's what is the aspiration of the law in California. It means a lot of cooperation between the two parents. And if parents were good at a lot of kind cooperation between the two of them, they would not be getting a divorce. That's asking people who now are screaming at each other, hate each other, detest each other, to come together for the benefit of the children. They're much more likely to be talking behind the back of the spouse, saying what an awful person is, showing the wounds they have from having lived that many years with that terrible person, asking the kids to understand their pain, and they're doing terrible things to the kids, trying to capture them. I left this out in my presentation. In our culture, getting more of the children, having more of their allegiance, more of the time with them, that is the trophy. That means you were the good person, and it's the other person who is the damaged and bad person. And it can be seen in what the court finally decided or what the final textures of this divorce arrangement was. That is the thing that spares the person who wins out from as much guilt as they would have otherwise, and allows them to go on demonizing the partner. given all these crazy forces at play, and they're very strong, and they're happening over and over and over again. I think the least that parents have to talk to each other, the better off they are. I was thinking of the following scenario. What would happen if a man was stationed in Japan, American serviceman is stationed in Japan. He takes a Japanese bride while he's overseas stationed in Japan, brings her home. They have two children. She has never gotten over being homesick. She can only go to visit Japan occasionally during the year. She doesn't like American culture. She thinks lots of it's corrupt and terrible. And they wind up getting a divorce, and she goes back to Japan. So there has to be some arrangement made. Is she out of the children's life because she's going back to Japan? Most likely, the child, to keep their lives more stable, will stay in California with the father during the school year. And so they can attend only one school, and they'll spend lots of vacation time and maybe all summer in Japan. Now, they can be in two very different cultures. They can speak Japanese when they're in Japan. They can sleep on a tatami mat with a wooden block for a pillow. They can wear Japanese garments. They can bow when they say something. All the standards of politeness and good behavior are entirely different in Japan. The relationship between children is different in Japan than it is here. And children are adaptable and flexible. They can go back and forth between life in Japan and life in the United States without missing a beat and just slip in and into that. That's so different than having the parents yelling, "You're not giving him the right portions of vegetables at night. God damn it, he needs more vegetables and less carbohydrates, and you're not feeding him right." And arguing and arguing and arguing. The principle of separate parenting is when a child is with the parent, unless this is a life changing decision of some kind, that is the only parent the child has at that time. That parent makes all the decisions about all the day to day trivia, the decisions have to be made. And the other parent just doesn't exist. That parent becomes the parent again when the child comes back to live with that parent. So there's no dissension between the two of them. They're not trying to convince each other that the other's parenting habits are no good.
I think that's great, and it works when the other parent is, 5,000 miles away.
No, it can work when they're in the same city. That can be a court order. That can be something they've agreed to.
Yeah, I think it tends to, if you can get people away from face-to-face communication and have them start to send emails and text messages, I think it kind of brings down the hostility and allows them to maybe have, less real-time effect like you're describing.
I have no objection in separate parenting. Anybody can make a suggestion.
Yeah.
If the mother says, I'm worried so and so is getting kind of porky, would you consider cutting back the carbohydrates? That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
All the recipient of the thing has to do is say thank you for your suggestion. Go about shoveling potato chips and ice cream into the kid.
Or pizza and frozen vegetables, whatever
That's
it
a
might
good
be.
one. So I'm a big fan of separate parenting. There are only two things, if the people are in the same city, that really need to be talked about. If there's a change in circumstances, if somebody's suddenly making a lot more money and the other person thinks it would be better if the allocation of money, the agreement about money was changed, yes, that's a conversation that's going to be had, and it's going to wind up in court if they don't agree. And the other thing is, if the visitation ritual has to be altered for any reason, like I am not going to be here next week when I'm supposed to be with a child, the one we brought up. Please try and find. You want me to take them some other time to make up for it? What do you want to do? Please let me know. But I'm not going to be available for that. I guess you may have to find a babysitter. Those are the only two topics. There needs to be any any communication about. Oh, if there's an emergency, I'm sorry, our son's in the hospital right now. That
Mm.
certainly needs to be.
How about which school are we going to send our child to? What about which doctor? What about kind of like
If they start having a history of difficulty with each other, fighting endlessly about those things, then I would suggest that they go to court and the court step in and carve out areas of decision making. You get to make the medical decisions of which medical personnel are to be with. Your spouse, your former spouse, has a right to consult with you and give you suggestions. But if you can't agree, you'll make the final decision. Your spouse is going to make the final decision about where schooling is to be had. You'll again be the consultant, but that person will make the final decision. You take the bickering out of it. You stop them from being able to argue with each other and go on and litigate over and over and over again.
In
about
other words, you need to be wealthy to have these kinds of disagreements.
it.
Otherwise, your kid goes to private school and whoever his insurance covers, I mean, public school. That sounds very expensive. I would not recommend that road. Yes.
Well,
I always wanted to-
wealthy people do that. They'll bicker about
Yeah.
everything and they'll keep going back into
No,
court to
they-
have some.
Yeah, if you have
Wow.
the means, yeah,
I see it all the time.
yeah.
That's when, if the judge is smart, he'll recommend they consider having a special master. Oh, it's called
Mhm.
something else now. I forgot.
PPC.
Yeah. And that's just the same thing in a different way. It's as if both of the unruly parents who are really like children bickering now have a parent who makes all the decisions. They don't get a
Mhm.
chance to make the decisions anymore at all if they can't agree.
Mhm, mm.
Boy, the worst thing possible for the kids is they grow up in an atmosphere that constant conflict is going on. So any of these things that reduce the hours that the children have to live in the middle of some unresolved conflict is good for the kids. And the setup that there should be happy and harmonious co-parenting, I think is a catch-22. It invites constant competition and constant bickering.
And if that was actually happening, we wouldn't be getting a divorce.
That's correct.
Yeah.
It happens once in a while.
Yes,
Yeah.
there are a few couples that are really settled, wise, fairly compassionate, really regretful that they couldn't make a go of it. Have some appreciation and even respect for the personhood of the other person,
Mhm,
and will indeed live out what the law would like them to do.
mhm,
They'll show up at gatherings,
Mhm.
weddings, or at graduations. And they'll even be cordial to each other. They'll hug each other and be glad to see each other. But
Oh, sure.
that is so rare. And to make that
Yeah.
the expectation of the culture, that's a really nice romantic daydream. But it's another daydream that's doomed to failure.
Mhm, mhm. Oh,
All right, to be continued next week.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good
Bye.
weekend.
You too.
Bye
See you
all.
guys. Bye.